Welcome to All in the Mind.
Thanks.
Ruby Wax, it's very lovely to have you here. I have your book here, which is the Sane New World.
Right. Thank you for plugging.
Just out, isn't
very
it?
early today.
Freshly published today. In recent years, you've embarked on an inward journey after a wonderful career in performance on television. What prompted this inward journey?
Probably I had it as a kid. You know, I only find how you think. It is all in the mind. There's nothing else. So it's how you see the world, it's how you treat everybody, and then you have habits of thinking. And I started to notice that when I was interviewing people that I kept falling into the same behavior at the start, and I didn't realize it till I was in the editing room and I could see how aggressive. I thought I was being charming and laid back, and I couldn't understand why nobody asked me for their phone number. My phone number. And then when I saw it, my eyes looked like I was going to pounce on him and kill him because it was, my life depended on them being interesting. So I had to teach myself to kind of soften up and listen. And I had to teach myself curiosity and not to jump into the stereotype, but to throw away the notes. And when I see the whites of their eyes, I could start to change what I was going to ask and talk to the human in front of me. And then I became fascinated with the Rubik's Cube of their mind to figure out what they were really thinking. And people adore that. So my interviews would usually go from 10 minutes to 3 days because nothing's more charming or flattering than curiosity.
Yes, you did spend 3 days with your subjects.
5, yeah.
And you had a great deal more energy than they did often, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I can keep going when I'm curious. I can just keep going till I get to your core, or I'm completely wrong. I've done that too, where I thought I cracked him and I was completely wrong. But then the thing is you just change gears. You don't go, oh, something's wrong with them. I think something's wrong with my lenses.
Now, you say that there was something mental going on as a child.
Well, not always.
No. What was happening there?
It was once every 5 years. So, if you had something every day, you'd really understand that it was chronic. Well, no, once every 5 years, I'd go to bed for a few days at a time. So I was tested for mono or glandular fever or Epstein. They used to call it Epstein-Barr. Do you know what that is?
No.
Oh, okay. It's like a blood disease. We used to call it Epstein-Barr and Grill. But it would be, or the flu, or I felt like I was drugged. But it wasn't often. And then, of course, my mother, who was bizarre and, couldn't stop cleaning and chasing dust balls, they said she was just having a turn, that she was having a change of life. And I said, yeah, for 87 years. So, nobody knew what that
mother was. She actually came from Nazi Germany.
I guess the Nazis were there at the time. So, yeah, I've met people who are Holocaust survivors, and they say, if you had a positive personality before, really it doesn't change much. So I think my mother was born fairly neurotic. And don't forget, she escaped before the Holocaust. And they had no idea what was going on. So I think she was holding the explosives before she came to America.
Yeah. One of the things that you talk about in your bouts of depression, which we'll talk about shortly, is the critical voices that are in your head.
Yeah, but critical voices are in your head too, I bet.
Yes, they are. They are.
So that has nothing to do with depression. Everybody has a critical voice. Otherwise, you'd be run over with a car. I mean, we're supposed to have, and it's usually negative, because you know how an animal looks around to see what's coming up behind him? Well, 50,000 years ago, we got language. So instead of just peering behind your shoulders, the words started to match, like, oh my God, this guy's trying to, oh my God, I didn't get invited to the party. Oh, so everything becomes a state of emergency. That's why the thoughts are so negative.
Yeah.
You don't have to obey them, but that's what it is.
So do you think those critical voices are exacerbated by perhaps your mother's critical voices? Or
well, everybody's mother says, no, you shouldn't do that. Don't put your fingers in the light socket. So it is applicable when you're like 2 years old. The only thing is you've got that don't do, watch out, you should have, when you get older. But then a lot of mothers are more soothing, too. They'll go, oh, you put your hand in the light socket, maybe it wouldn't be such a good idea next time. And so they have a more soothing voice. So those people may grow up to have a self-soothing mechanism.
So you experienced quite severe bouts of depression throughout your life?
No, I didn't. I had it every 5 years, but we didn't know what it was. And I wouldn't call it severe or taking to your bed. It only got severe later on.
Okay, so what did it feel like? Can you give me an example of perhaps when it did take you down?
Well, later in life, it doesn't feel like, you just feel like you're sleeping, but you can't, or you've been drugged. If somebody put a Mickey in your drink, you'd be out of it, trying to wake up. A little like anesthetic when you're going under. Everything that made you a human being just disappears. And it doesn't matter whether you have a manicure or jump off a cliff. Either one is a possibility. And so all decisions are out the window. It doesn't matter anymore. So when people say, does it make you more creative? I go, you picture yourself lying there like a block of cement. A, you're not funny, and B, you're not going to write songs. And C, it's 1 in 4, so not that many people are funny.
So can you give me an example where you had to cope with it in the middle of doing your work or
I didn't.
in the entertaining?
If I was sick, then my husband would say I had the flu. So I always skirted it. I never got caught. And if you did get caught, I wouldn't be able to do the television show. But it was once every 5 years. So, I don't have a job that's 9 to 5 every day. I feel sorry for the guy at work who suddenly, goes under, and he has to fake it. And the more you fake it, the more it's going to bite you in the ass in the end, because it's still going on no matter how much you're smiling, and it will devour you eventually. Mm-hmm. So don't feel sorry for me. Feel sorry for the guy at work or the woman who stays at home.
Yes. It's still not managed well, is it, in the workplace, for example?
Well, in England, if it's on your CV, because they ask you if you have mental illness, you might find yourself out of a job. And don't forget, these people are smart. So if you just dismissed them for a few days, like if they had a broken leg, and then when it passes, you let them come back in, you're losing your workforce. Like in England, they lose $100 billion every year because of absenteeism. So think of the weight on the government. Mm-hmm. Well, they have to change it soon.
Mm. So what prompted you to come out publicly about
only
depression?
Because Comic Relief put a big poster of me in the subway stations, but lots of them that said, this woman has mental illness, please help her, because they wanted some of their money to go to charities. But I didn't know they were going to do that. So I was so mortified that I thought, I'm going to write a show to make it look like it's my publicity poster. So I wrote a show called Live from the Priory, which is our big institution, which had never been done. But they let me put up a marquee outside, and then I invited half my friends, and half the inmates came. And that was unbelievable, because nobody knew who was what, except obviously the inmates started screaming. Some of them. And one of my friends turned to him and said, what an asshole. And he went, no, I think Ruby's quite good. And he went, not her, you. So it was hilarious.
Breaking loose.
And then when the show was over, the deal was I could go into the institution and then stay overnight, because nothing's more endearing than the smoking room. So then I toured for 2 years and went to every single priory, and then started going to national health institutions. Everybody was fascinating. There isn't one person who's mentally ill who's not interesting.
So what was so interesting about your audience, and what did you learn from your audience in those institutions?
Well, that everybody has the same questions. And when I went to the West End, or I've taken the show to Melbourne, and I've taken the show to L.A., the audience asks the same questions as people do in the mental institutions.
Yeah,
A, is it past?
What sort of questions?
B, is it nature or nurture? C, where did I get this from? D, are the pills doing anything? I don't want to take them because, I think they're doing damage. D, it's people they have no place to talk about it. So they kind of burst forth during the second half of my show. And I can't answer all the questions, but I do start the ball rolling. So people that place just gets, it's like a church. where people start standing up in the stalls and saying, I've been on medication for 20 years. I never told my wife. And she's sitting next to him. So it was like the Muppets, where everybody starts talking and then they bond and become friends. So it is like an AA meeting in there. Yeah, people have the same questions. I mean, they were out of it when they were in the institutions. They'd come in a coma. And then by the time I finished my show, they'd wake up and answer pretty coherent questions. Except sometimes they would say, where did I get my moisturizer? It would really have nothing to do with my show. Sure, everything is possible.
Yes. So did you get a sense that they found it liberating for you to be talking about
Yeah, they were really relieved. And also they knew I was one of them. So I wasn't talking down to them. And nobody had ever made it funny. But also I made it dark. So I was talking to my people. And they thought, how great that I'm not being patronized.
Yeah. So how powerful a tool do you think comedy is?
It's not a powerful tool at all for somebody who's depressed. I think for the normal person, laughter is pretty good. But all of this exercise, nutrition, when you're in the depths of something, really, they're not going to get up and jog. Just leave them alone. When it passes, then you can start getting healthy.
So do you think these people on this tour, were they responding to your comedy or were they responding to your
responding to, well, I took them on a roller coaster ride. So I started off very funny and talking about 4 and 4, that none of us have an instruction manual, that we're all, how do you act like an adult? I sometimes, when I'm with my kids and we've glued onion rings on the cat's eyes, we all get scared waiting for our mother to come home. And then I realize I'm the mother. Like, I don't know how to act like a wife. All these instructions. Our domestic appliances have instructions. Put in white powder. On my washing machine it says that, and I always say if I tried that I'd end up in rehab. But there's so many questions. There's no guidebook. So how do we live our lives is the big question. Well, of course, that has nothing to do with depression. So the whole first half of the show is just the point of the whole thing is trying to fit in and find your tribe. We're all hunting around looking for our people. And sometimes you get these, clusters of, I don't know, people in high school or people who like the same football teams. But really, that isn't your tribe. That's just cocktail chatter. So I did find my own people when I was institutionalized. The second half of the show is about depression, but the audience still nod their head as if they understand. And they do understand. They know the darkness. So then I go dark, then I go light. Because if you don't pull people out of darkness, the show would be about whining.
In the first part of your book, you talk about normal and what's wrong with normal?
Well, what is normal? What do you think normal is? I don't know. I mean, the first book, the part of the book is what everybody I've ever met suffers from. Not everybody. I mean, there are a few blessed souls who probably live out in the country, but everybody who's in an urban environment, we are competing. We get too much information. Like I'm surrounded with today. I have to know about that Ohio thing. I have to know. Everywhere I go, it's in the ether. It's like a meme. So that our fear levels go off the planet. We were only supposed to know about our next door neighbor across the white picket fence. How much information can I take? The 21st century, we don't have the bandwidth. It's like having too many windows open on your computer. And we pride ourselves on multitasking. It actually drives you nuts. And then there's other things. The busyness. People congratulate you and go, how are you? You go, busy. They go, that's fantastic. I go, busy. I've had 2 heart attacks. They go, that's great. God forbid you should say, I have some spare time. They'd look at you like you were nuts and certainly wouldn't invite you to the next dinner party. So what we revere is actually making us sicker. There's things that we all have, but then in the book, because I studied neuroscience, there's a reason for it. It didn't just happen. What made us sane once, when we were in the savannah, because we didn't have any OCD then, but we could fill with fuel, which is what we have now, the adrenaline and the cortisol, to take on the predator. And then when the incident was over, you could go back to grazing. But now when we get that, red mist, There's no, what are you going to eat, the traffic warden? You can't take, there's nowhere to take it out. So we're left with it, we're in this high octane thing.
So you decided
area.
to go on to study. You studied to become a psychotherapist?
First, I decided to be a psychotherapist because I think women who usually are going through menopause decide now it's time to go. It's like either that or they start a home for stray cats. So I've noticed that. So you suddenly want to take care of people. It comes with hormones, I'm sure, make that whole thing happen. So I thought it was fascinating. You know, 1 week it was Jung. It was like a smorgasbord. So he made me feel good because he introduced me to the dark side. And then
Was he your favourite, Jung?
Every week, my favorite. Then it was Winnicott, who I loved, so I didn't have to feel bad when I fed my kids out of the dog bowl. You know, I was just a good enough mother. And then Melanie Klein with her. Every week I was into whoever. And then I started to become a psych. You have to do hours. And at first I was just fascinated. But you got to either be nuts or an angel to sit there and take somebody's pain. So I thought, well, I can't do this for a living. And really, I'm really interested in how your brain works, because that really does exist. I mean, if you want to believe when you look in a scanner that that's your imagination, you go look for the UFOs. But when you look in there, I mean, we're still pretty primitive. But when you look in there and see certain areas light up, like when you're in a heightened state, and if you do certain things, the heightened state alleviates. I'm real interested in that. And really how when we're observing the world, it's virtual reality. It isn't really what's out there. It's how your brain interprets it. That's fascinating.
And how does that help? How does that help you manage your own state of mind?
Because when I get like a feeling of upset or anxiety or whatever, because part of it is mindfulness, and you really go down into the sensation, I'm only putting the words to it, saying it must be because this guy left me in 1972. It must be whatever. Sometimes it's just feelings. So if you leave a little gap and just learn to observe, you've got a space to say, this is I'm just putting labels on this, so just let it pass. Because in 10 minutes or in 15 minutes, it's gone. If you really focus in, if you pretend it isn't there and just get yourself real busy to move away from it, it will exasperate. And eventually it will come up and bite you.
So it's mindfulness you're talking about.
I like mindfulness. I mean, not everybody does. Some people might run a mile, so I'm not advocating it. It just happened to work for me.
So can you help us, I guess, define what mindfulness is to you and I guess how you would represent it to others?
Well, the literal translation is being intentionally aware of what's going on in the moment without any judgment. So it's really a way of focusing in, which I need to do before I go on stage. Even if I notice that my brain is going 200 miles an hour and saying, you're going to fail, because everybody has a theme song. If you sit back and watch, it's no longer in the limbic system, which is, again, your high alarm. You're using another part of your brain to observe. Now, that just gives you a little bit of a gap to decide, to give you a choice on how you're going to deal with it. You might have to wait a few more minutes and get your breathing down. But you do, let's say you had it in a relationship. Before you did your what's it called, Tripwire reaction, like, you always do this to me. You'd have a little bit of a gap just before the poison starts to say, wait a minute, this is my habit. Let's just hold it back for a minute. And then you have a choice on how to respond. So it's the holding back. Now, that doesn't mean repression. That just means it's the opposite of repression. You're noticing it. So you start to learn how your inner mechanics work. And we all have habits of thinking, like mine is always outrage and anger. So the only way to break that habit, because it's deeply embedded in my brain, I got those neurons connected. So I'll always go for the attack. But just by noticing it, eventually those neurons start to disconnect. And a new habit may start, because the whole thing is neuroplasticity, which means the brain is constantly changing. unless you play into whatever you play into, those neurons. If you
Fire together, wire together,
if they
fire
together, they wire together. So if you play the same game every day, it's embedded. It's like a record that's got a groove in it. But if you start to stand back a little bit, they do loosen up, and then you can form a new habit. You're still intrinsically the same. I still have an instinct to kill you if you provoked me. But I might just not bite your head off, which ultimately used to make me sick. I loved being
that feeling
aggressive.
of angry.
But then you get that backwash the next day, and it's like a bad hangover.
Feeling bad about the way you reacted.
Sometimes I can still lose my temper, but I come down much faster. And ultimately, I may yell at you, and that may be like a cigarette, pleasurable for a second, but the damage it does upstairs with your cortisol, which is affecting your memory, it's affecting your heart, it's affecting, people should think about their mind way before they think about their body, because it's your mind that's going to kill you.
Mm. So you really feel that there's a difference in the way you conduct yourself, and are you noticing that there's a difference in the way people respond to you?
Yeah, I think people really like me now, whereas I asked people and they said I was really scary before, which I didn't realize. And now and we do work, we work like neural Wi-Fi. So if I'm not afraid or I'm feeling safe, you're going to feel safe. If I'm fearful, you're going to pick it up. And all you have to do is go into a movie theater and everybody screams at once to understand that we work like an orchestra. Yeah. We don't work in isolation.
But part of that scariness was one of the things that worked for you, I think, in your comedy and in your
scare
shows.
people. Yeah,
yeah, that worked.
Yeah, it worked, but ultimately, you become a stereotype, and I didn't want to, everybody treats you like you're that kind of person, and so you start to respond like you're that kind of person, and I don't really like being narrowed, and it's really not good for your health. When people come up to you and they're laughing, and I said, well, I didn't say anything funny. That's how a lot of comedians, they don't really make it. A lot of them have had heart attacks, or they've tried to they're infantilized. I'm dyslexic, so I have a hard time saying things. And so it's really hard to expand, to grow, to reinvent who they are, because they're held in time. It's A, because it's lucrative, and B, they need that much attention. But I'm really aware of reinventing. There's a minute I lost my mojo, so I figured, okay, let the next one replace me. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do? And then I thought, let's go back to what I was really interested, which is how your brain works.
You say you lost your mojo. Tell me about that turning point for you, the point at which you thought you needed to reinvent yourself.
There was the last couple interviews, and I thought I didn't like them, and I can't fake it. Dislike really shows on my face. And the PR people started to come in and say, okay, you only have 10 minutes and you can't ask that question. So I thought, well, what am I doing here? Because I used to form a relationship with those people. But if the publicity person is standing in and watching me like a hawk, we're not going to make it. There's no love affair. And I'm not a tabloid. I wasn't trying to get their secrets. I was trying to show what would happen if there were no cameras and we were having dinner.
So you missed that authenticity, I suppose.
There was no more authenticity. Mm-hmm. And also, my first love was documentaries, where I'd get to meet extraordinary people, and I was a great researcher. I could really hunt them out. And then they said, oh, no, now do celebrities. Well, there's only so many years you can do it, unless you're Graham Norton, who's really fascinated with it. I'm not that interested after a while, because it's like I figured a lot of them out. Mm. And it's a disease. Except then some of them I fell in love with, and I'm still friends with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you miss it? Do you miss that type of work?
Do I miss it? Do I miss being a teenager? Do I miss smoking pot when I was 20? Ask me about other things. We miss everything. I miss having babies. So, yeah, I guess I miss it, but is that going to help? It's gone. So now, in a few years, I'll say, did I miss going to Oxford? Yeah, I probably did. So get to the next. Mm.
As a result of the shows that you did in the mental institutions, you took the feedback from the audience and you created black tribes.
Oh, somebody. I really wanted to start an AA movement for the 1 in 4. So somebody built me blackdogtribe.com, which was where people with the same syndrome could meet. So it would be caregivers, because they always say, "What do I say to my friend, my relative?" I go, "How would I know? You guys should meet." It's like bereavement groups. How do I know? I'm not in your... But if you meet, A, you have more power. B, you have somebody to talk to. And C, you're going to come up with some answers. So I open the theaters once a week in the afternoon, and I encourage people to meet. But even better, this website started so they could meet online and be anonymous. So the people that couldn't get out of bed would meet them. The people who were at work and were hiding it would meet their own people. Then they could start answering questions. But the next step was that they would meet in public, which I haven't got to yet.
Okay. So what are your future hopes for that website?
Well, eventually, and I'm doing it with this really big boy, Peter Fonagy, who is he runs the Anna Freud Center, and he's the great neuroscientist. So him and I have an open group now coming up next month where the public can come in free. They're listening to the great neuroscientists and also explaining about drugs, and then they have me to lighten it up. So that's a walk-in center. So if we could, and don't forget, those people coming in are exposed. So that if we can start that, and it would take place in Leicester, and it would take place in small hairdressing salons. Of course, you'd always have to have somebody there to monitor it, a professional. But if that could start happening, you'd really alleviate the shame, especially for kids, because it's so shameful to admit to somebody that you're mentally ill that it exasperates it. So you're anxious about being anxious. You hate yourself for being such a wanker. You think, well, I've got food. I'm in the Western world, but you forget in India they got it too. 1 in 4. 1 in 4 in Africa, probably more. But we're really ashamed of it in the West because we think, well, I got a car. And you think, but you wouldn't think that way if you had shingles or you had cancer. So why is it about, why can every other organ get sick and you get sympathy except your brain, which runs everything? So
isn't it getting better, though, that the stigma is slowly decreasing? There are a number of organisations and institutions that really draw attention to the stigma and try and break it down.
In LA, they were mentioning that if you say you were a criminal, you'll get a job. But if they find out you have mental illness, good luck. Maybe there's some countries where it's okay, but they still chain him up in Africa and call him a demon. So I guess in some places, but maybe in the outback, God knows what they think. Yeah, maybe in cities it's losing its stigma.
You were just going back to mindfulness, and mindfulness isn't for everybody.
No.
What are some other...
But in my book, in Chapter 5, I give you other ways of training the brain.
So just give us a taste of some of those.
Well, cognitive therapy is really good, but the thing that I do give different exercises because some people want to be more active. You can do it while you're walking. Mindfulness isn't sitting in a lotus position. It's just about when you can decide to go into 4th gear. But the problem was, for me, when my kids were growing up, I was still in 4th gear while I was trying to talk to them, about their problems. And I couldn't get off the telephone because we're so addicted to our own adrenaline. So there are other means of learning to train your attention. It's all about attention. Even when you're running, if you're listening to the radio and your attention is all over, you're not really practicing attention. So whatever you're doing, your head has to be there. You're playing piano, get in your fingers. That's being present. So it's this training of saying, where am I? Even when I'm on the tube, I'll suddenly go listen. So if you suddenly tune into your listening, you are in the moment, but you're also strengthening your insula. which is a part of you that, and there's another bit that decouples from the limbic system and gives you that gap again. It means, let's say you're in a really stressful meeting. If you did something like listen while the guy's talking, your stress levels go down because you can't be stressed and listen or feel your feet on the ground or follow your breathing at the same time. So it's a trick. It's just a trick. If you really use one of your senses, even if you had something in your mouth and you suddenly go taste it, your amygdala will go right down. So it's a fantastic trick if you're in a meeting to do something like that. But because your senses are real, this isn't fairy dust, you're not waving a wand, you're not holding a crystal. You are sending. You're using that, the somatosensory cortex to really feel, taste, touch, see. And as soon as you plug into that, the anxiety goes down. You can't do both at once, but you got to practice that.
Mm-hmm. Just taking stock of where you are now in your life, what role do you think wisdom plays in our lives? What's gone on before, or what we've been through.
Well, I make a joke that you used to go to the old elders. I don't know any elder that's got their brain left. My grandmother couldn't even find her teeth. I would like to have somebody older than me to pass down some information, but at a certain age, you turn into wine or you turn into vinegar. You can get more and more hysterical as you get older because you get more fearful, and also their brains start getting very narrow-minded. And we encourage it. Oh, look, they do the same routine every day. Isn't that nice? Grandma's doing that. Every day she takes the dog out. If we knew a little bit more about the brain before the full dementia kicks in, make this woman, change your routine. Because the more you experience, the denser that gray matter gets, and that gray matter means more neurons, and that the more neurons mean you have resilience, and it holds back dementia. So that's wisdom. That's really wisdom, to understand that your brain is flexible and you stay open and you ask questions. I don't know anybody older that ever asks a question. I've got kids that grandma comes over and she says, "That's nice. Isn't that lovely? Well done." You go, "Come on, ask my son about physics. Open your mind. You can get it in there. Ask him what quantum physics is." The kid is sitting in front of you. Be curious. If she learns a little bit about quantum physics, she's growing new neurons. She's growing new neurons. She might not get senile that fast. So, you don't have to go learn Chinese, but ask people around you questions.
What do you most want to pass on to your children?
My children are pretty evolved. I have to say, they're pretty evolved. I don't know that this next generation, first of all, I'm not an insane mother. And then I married my husband on purpose because I knew he had good genes, because his parents were in the trenches, his great-grandparents. So he could take anything. And so I intentionally married somebody who had, childbearing thumbs, and he could take care of them. So they're very nurtured. Of course, there is one who has a little bit signs of depression. It's nothing, it's Russian roulette. You might be the sweetest parents on earth and you've got yourself a schizophrenic. So we don't know.
And how are you going to be able to help?
You say get on medication as fast as you can, because if you get it after one episode, you might never have it again. After 3 episodes, welcome to my world.
So medication is something that
it's all we've got.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, and it may be terrible for somebody, but there's 2,000 different flavors. So I'd keep going.
Okay.
And then also I add some mindfulness, because you can't just depend on medication. Or you could do cognitive, or you could just do therapy, because there's somebody who can listen.
So what does the future hold for you? What's your next passion?
Well, I'm taking the book, which is about how the brain works, and I'm turning it into a show.
Sane New World.
And because you can see a little bit of on TED Talks, and I'm going to extend that because there's this area called infotainment where because I have a sense of humor and I'm funny.
Yes, I've noticed.
Yeah, and but I think people are really interested. So you can educate and you can be really funny, and I think that might be the next zeitgeist for entertainment.
Ruby Wax,
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
RN.